Now, let's go to the States. There's been Californian wildfires. And, of course, the lovies are out there literally fanning the flames, telling us it's all climate change. So let's get the truth, as only outsiders can get the truth, from our great friend Michael Shellenberger, the author of Apocalypse Never. You've seen him many times on the show. He's the bloke to listen to about what is actually happening. Michael, welcome back to Outsiders.
Thanks for having me.
Well, take us through it, Michael. How severe are the wildfires, and are they all the fault of climate change?
The fires this year are very severe. There's a mega fire. We've had about 3 million acres burned, over 30 people killed. Though the Wall Street Journal just reported a couple of days ago something very important, which is that 1/3 of those deaths were in a town that 2 years ago had requested to selectively thin the forests around the town, and the state government regulators sat on that request for 2 years. The whole town went up in flames, thousands of homes destroyed, 10 people killed, and it's proof that really, it really confirms for me that the essential dynamic here is the accumulation of wood fuel, and the governor and the effort by Democrats mostly to blame climate change is also an effort to distract from what is a clear forest management failure and a failure of the state bureaucracy to allow these towns to better manage its own forests.
Michael, as you know, in Australia, we had the bushfires earlier in the year. The New South Wales inquiry discovered that the real problem was the lack of what we call hazard burning or reduction. So same sort of problem here. So how big is it? How big an issue is it? People wanting to burn off and not being allowed to?
It's not even, we don't really know. This was there needs to be an investigation is the short answer to that. This Wall Street Journal reporter is just somebody who's covered forests in the state for so long. He's been covering it for like 25 years. He looked into this, but it's really quite scandalous that this town had requested 2 years ago to thin those forests. All of the attention, several weeks ago, I started writing columns about the fact that wood fuel was the main driver of the intensity of these fires, not climate change. Now the journalists have retreated to a position of saying, oh, well, climate change and wood fuel are both important causes, but that's also misleading. Here's the way I think you have to think about it. Climate change is neither necessary nor sufficient as a cause of these mega fires and high intensity fires. By contrast, the accumulation of wood fuel after a century or more of fire suppression is both necessary and sufficient as a cause of these fires. So to suggest that even climate change and wood fuel are equal causes is misleading.
James.
I want to ask you, too, what about some of the causes of these fires? We're talking about climate change, but how many of these fires have been caused by human activity? And I'm wondering, I've seen some reports that arsonists may have been responsible for this, which would be a little bit different to some of the climate change narrative. Have you heard this? And is there any indication that some of this might be related to some of the unrest that's been going on in the U.S.?
There's certainly been rumors of it, though I think what's important is to distinguish between two kinds of forests. And it's confusing because fire is not bad. Most forests need fires. Now, there's been too little prescribed fires in the mountain forests or the Sierra Nevadas, and there's been too many fires in the shrubland or oakland or what we call chaparral forests. And those fires in the shrublands, which are the much smaller forests, they don't even look like forests to us out here. They don't look like mountain forests. We need fewer ignitions, fewer fires, and the ignitions have mostly historically been driven by the failure of the state's electric utilities and the government to require the clearing of vegetation around those wires. In the mountain forests, we haven't had enough of the prescribed burning, which has allowed for the accumulation of 5 times more wood fuel than existed 100 years ago, which in itself explains why there's a high intensity fire. So I think it's less about the ignitions and more about this longer term forest management. I wrote a story about a forest that was well managed, and it sort of was an island in this just sea of fire. And when the high intensity fires came into the well managed forest, it dropped out of the crowns or the tops of the trees, which had been burning so intensely, to the forest floor. It burned a little bit more hot than a prescribed fire, but it didn't burn up the whole forest. It actually did what fires are supposed to do. So clearly the decisive element here is the accumulation of wood fuel and the management of forests to get that wood fuel down, either through selective thinning mechanically with chainsaws and people, or through prescribed burns, or usually a combination of the two.
Rita.
Now, the California governor and Joe Biden, they've been seeking to politicize these fires. I think Joe Biden accused Trump of climate arson, fairly hyperbolic language there. How much is environmental policy a issue in the upcoming election? Is this being talked about in other places other than California, which is Democrat heartland these days?
I mean, as you all know, I wrote Apocalypse Never to push back against this really exaggerated extreme climate alarmism. I mean, look, climate change is real. It's a problem we should deal with. But the good news actually is that we are dealing with it. I mean, people are attacking. What's ironic is that they're attacking Trump on climate change, but emissions are lower now than when he took office. They declined 2% last year, or 10% of electricity, or 10% of carbon emissions from electricity declined last year, mostly from the transition from coal to natural gas. Our emissions are lower than they've been. So it's not like, and besides, it takes about 30 years or more for the carbon dioxide to translate into warming. So the idea that somehow Trump's going to leave off, that Trump gets in office and then somehow the temperatures are going to rise and the forests are going to burn. I mean, it's just crazy talk. It's so unscientific. And yet it's completely given a pass because the media has been so biased on this. They just hate Trump so much that they basically want to ascribe every natural disaster, every fire on him. And of course, because California is run by a supermajority of Democrats. I mean, we've run the state. I'm a longtime Democrat myself. We've run the state for a very long time. And it's really the state's fault that you have this huge accumulation of wood fuel. Donald Trump doesn't have anything to do with that.
Just very briefly, Michael, before we go, historically, the fires were much worse, I understand. Back in the 1800s, there would be 11 million hectares burned, numbers like that. So it was historically far, far worse. Would you agree with that, your studying of it?
Yeah, I mean, what's changed is that it's the kind of fire is different. So, we used to have, this is where I think it is similar to Australia in the sense that, the scientists estimate between 4 and 12 million acres burned annually before Europeans arrived. But the difference is that those tended to be the smaller, low-intensity fires. And the problems with the fires that we have now is just that we've had so much wood fuel. They end up being this high-intensity fires, and they create, with all the debris on the forest floor, they end up creating what they call ladder fires, where the fires just end up going into the tops of the trees. And that's no good because that often ends up just destroying the whole ecosystem and turning it into shrubland. So really, it's just a management problem. I mean, we can have healthy forests even as global temperatures go up. That's what we've seen in these recent cases where well-managed forests survive the mega fires burning all around them.
Michael Shellenberger, author of Apocalypse Never, which I urge you to read. Thanks so much for coming on, Outsiders, and we'll chat again soon. And have a great time in the run-up to the election, mate.
Thanks for having me.